one of the reasons I go traipsing through the wood is so that I can get a little bit of exercise before the season starts. Hauling in corn, hauling in equipment, hauling in tree stands. Just generally getting out and hiking around. When I'm dragging in equipment or dragging in feed or dragging out an animal that's been downed, I need a little bit of energy, and I need to be in a condition that it's not going to cause me all kinds of problems. I'm taking just a minute right now, and I'm going to go check this camera that I put the Milo down on 2 days ago to see what kind of a response we had. Something that's really important right now is to look way out in front of me, the direction that I'm walking, because it's one of those crucial periods of the day that deer and livestock are out feeding, and I'm going to talk more about that in this video, part 2. So what I'm seeing here is that the piles are not totally gone, but something's been in them and spread them around. You can see the dimples and the depressions. It's as if the deer really didn't know what to do about this. There's still plenty of feed here. I'm going to watch this over the next couple of days to see what happens. One thing that's noteworthy is that the 2 apples that were right here are now gone, and so are the other pieces that were here. So what I'm taking away from this is that the deer prefer the apples over the Milo, at least right now, here, I think. What they definitely prefer over anything else right now is the corn. Now, I'm not real sure what I got on this SD card, but it looks like there's a lot of exposure, so I'm very eager to see what happened, because the sign on the ground just doesn't say the same thing that the camera disc is saying. I'm a little curious about that. Now, folks, I told you we'd talk a little bit more about this lunar modeling today, and I'm kind of going through a little bit of leaves here. What I want to do right now is kind of transition into the discussion about the lunar modeling. I mentioned earlier in this video that today we were going to address part 2 of this short series on being able to change the way you deer hunt and being able to pattern deer in a way like you've never been able to do before. Something that's important to remember is that there are 4 primary or core feeding periods of the day for cattle and for deer and for other cloven hooved animals or split hooved. One of the things that I showed earlier at the intro of this video was some passing video of cattle on the highway over a 70-mile stretch on my drive home. Now, every single cow, with 1 or 2 exceptions, literally only 1 or 2, not very many at all, of these cattle were on their feet. And there's a reason for that. I was driving home between about 4:30 and 4:50 p.m. when I shot those clips, and those times completely and perfectly corresponded with what I'm going to share with you a little bit later in this series. But first thing that I want to do is I want to focus on these 4 core periods. The 4 core periods are this, and they are not the same. They do not act the same. They do not cause the deer to behave the same. They don't last the same duration. They're completely different and they're completely isolated, but there are 4 periods that do occur. And these 4 phases respond and react differently to other parts and components of the lunar cycle and the lunar phases. So the first one is called the lunar transit. Now, the lunar transit is the period of time or the point at which the moon is at its highest point in the sky. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be directly 90 degrees off of the surface of the earth directly above you. That's not the way that the moon's pattern and travel works. But there is a point in the sky where the moon is at its highest. It will no longer climb, but it will begin to fall. That is a very, very important point in time. Now, the flip side of that is when the moon is completely opposite of that position, directly below the earth, at its maximum position. That's a second phase, or a second period. I don't want to call it a phase, because a phase is a little bit different than that when you're talking about the moon. But it's a different period. It's an important period. The 2 others are when the moon rises and when the moon sets. And each of those does something entirely different. Well, The neat thing about today, when I was working and was able to travel home finally this afternoon, is that the lunar transit was actually in motion at that point. This morning I got up at about 3:30 to get ready for work. I left my house at about 4:15 or 4:20. When I did, the moon was positioned almost at its highest point in the sky. I kind of knew that was going to happen because it's one of those things that I track, and I'll show you how to do that. But I knew that it was going to set, and a little bit later in the day, it was going to rise again, as it always does, and it was going to hit a transit period about 4:30 to 5:30 this afternoon. One of the things that's important to remember is that for the moon to arrive in basically the same position as it was the day before, you have to wait a period of about 24 and a half hours. Sometimes as many as 25, but generally 24 and a half to 25 hours, and the moon will be in its exact same location as it was before. That's crucial to understand, because if you're looking for the moon being in a certain place in the sky or in the horizon, which we will be, then you need to understand that the clock is going to rotate. It's going to spin, and you're going to have to accommodate for that. So we'll talk more about that very soon. So 4 phases: lunar transit, when the moon is directly overhead, directly beneath, when it's rising, and when it's setting. 4 key periods. They all act differently, but they're very, very, very key to this process. Now I'm going to switch gears for just a second, and I'm going to take you away on a sidebar conversation that may or may not be related. I have several children, and my children are extremely active. I remember in my youth, whenever I was active at school, that I would completely exert myself at what I was doing, whether it was athletics or schoolwork or whatever the case may have been at the time, enjoying time with my friends even. But when I got home, I would have a tendency to do something that I think most teenagers will do, and that is eat and crash. And depending on how long I exerted myself, I might crash for a little while, or I might crash for a long period of time. That is going to be connected in what we're going to talk about. So
hey everybody, welcome back. It's actually the next day. I didn't get a chance to wrap up this video last night, but that's okay. I took the disc home that I pulled out of the camera and discovered that there were 1,900 pictures on that SD card. It was crazy. Something that I found out was that the deer were actually coming in. It was deer that were doing it, and they were... The crazy thing about these shots was that there were 4, 5, 3, 4 deer in just about every shot. One of the things that I found too was that they kept circling back around to the Milo. They'd take some, they'd leave, they'd come back, and there's one particular buck that I'm watching that he did this 3, 4, 5 different times, and they circled the piles. It's just like they kept coming back and coming around and coming back and cycling through. And, you know, from an archer's perspective, that is exactly the kind of thing that I want to see happen. The reason is I may not have the perfect shot set up at a given point in time, but rather than having the deer pass all the way through the setup, I can wait for another shot opportunity to present itself. And that's going to be very important to me as I'm sitting in the tree stand or sitting in a blind on the ground. I need as many shot opportunities to present as possible to make sure that I get the right one at the right time to take a good, clean shot and bring home the meat, bring home the protein to the table. Now, what I've done, obviously, in light of this is I'm on my way home again. It's Friday, September 20th, and I took off a couple of extra hours today so that I could go home and start the weekend early and enjoy that time. So one of the things that I've done on my way home today is stop at the co-op and get a couple of extra bags of Milo, and I'm going to stash those or stockpile those someplace at the house so that when we get into those key periods of the deer season, I can pull those out and have something a little extra. What I'm really excited about is the different activity levels that I had over the Milo piles on camera. the fact that they were cycling through really, really excites me. And that's something that I take mental notes all the time. That is absolutely one of those things that I'm taking mental note of, because there will be times when I need them to do that very thing, to cycle back through. So on that note, we've talked about 4 different periods. I want to clarify something that was said just a little bit earlier in the video. There are actually and technically 2 transit periods. The one that we refer to more often than not as the transit is the one that's directly overhead. Transit, by definition, is a movement, a passing through of something. It's in motion. The second transit period, and that's what I referred to on the video clips that are earlier in this one from yesterday with the cattle, is that the moon, when it's moving directly underneath, is actually in a transit cycle itself. I may refer to it from time to time as being a transit period, but by and large, when I say transit, I mean directly overhead. That's going to be how I'm going to refer to some very important parts of the day as we move forward in parts 3 and 4 and 5 of this multi-part video series. So with that, I am going to cut this one off. It's September 20th. Hope you guys have a great week. I'll probably put another part or 2 out over the weekend, but enjoy yours. See you next time on Raw Turageous. And be sure and hit that like button or hit that subscribe button so that you can be advised whenever new content gets posted. We want to make sure that we share as much as we can with you. Thank you for watching.